إذن بداية هادئة تميل إلى التباين في المؤشرات الأمريكية لهذه الجلسة، ولكن أيضا تأتي بعد تراجعات كانت قوية يوم أمس. ننتقل مباشرة إلى فلوريدا وضيفنا للحديث حول تحركات السوق في أولى جلسات أيضا في هذه الجلسة، وسنديب شارما رئيس قسم الاستثمار في سانتكس كابيتال. أهلا بك معنا. يعني اليوم إن كنا ننظر سنديب اليوم لهذه التحركات الهادئة، تقييم المستثمر برأيك لأي من المعطيات ينظر تحديدا في إطار إن كانت التدخلات التي نشهدها من الرئيس ترامب فيما يتعلق بإقالة ليزا، أو النظر اليوم فعليا إلى أن السوق قد تشبع فيما يتعلق بقطاع التكنولوجيا وبدأت حالة التصحيح لحركة السوق؟
Always a pleasure to be on your show. And to answer your question, I think the investors are digesting quite a bit of information. We've gone through many months of the tariff ups and downs, but the markets have survived all of that. We've also gone through a significant concern about potentially removing the Fed chairman, and the markets have survived that as well. So I think the markets are generally quite resilient at this point in time. That doesn't mean that we could not have a seasonal correction in September and October. That's entirely likely, and that could happen. But the markets are very fully valued. I think, in my view, the markets are really looking at that there is no significant catalyst that can produce a very large decline. A garden variety 10% decline is quite okay, but not something very substantial beyond that. And the biggest thing for the markets to really think about is refinancing the U.S. debt. We've spoken about that on your show since the beginning of the year, that is the primary focus of the Trump administration. And the attacks on the Federal Reserve are somewhat geared towards pushing them to bring the rates down so that they can refi the debt at much lower rates.
سنديب، بما أنك تتحدث اليوم عن الفائدة ومعدلات الفائدة هناك، الملفت اليوم هذا التحرك. أرى بأن عوائد السندات على الشورت اند اليوم سنة، سنتين، 5 سنوات، 7 سنوات، هذه العوائد كلها متراجعة، ولكن عندما انظر إلى 10 سنوات وتحديدا 30 عام هذه العوائد مرتفعة. هل هذا سيكون، يعني إذا بحال استمر هذا الترند، هل هذا سيكون عائق بالنسبة للمستثمر، عائق بالنسبة للحكومة لإعادة التمويل؟
Well, it is a very good question, and it should be, but it's probably not going to be. And the reason for that is that currently, if the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent can refi, the debt, roll it over every 2 or 3 years, that is good enough for the time being. It relieves some pressure. But I will agree with you that the persistent level of the 10-year Treasury in particular is a significant cause for concern, and that is because the markets expect some of the actions, such as meddling with the Federal Reserve, forcing the rates to come down a little too early, and then the potential of tariff or inflation will continue to keep the risk premium a little bit high for the intermediate to long-term treasuries. But the activity in the 1, 2, 3 time year period, that makes a lot of sense because those rates will come down. Let me just summarize and say that I do think that the 10-year treasuries will come down, maybe not in the very near term, but we expect they were going to head down from whatever 4.23 or close from 4.3 to maybe like 3.78% range in the next 6 months or so.
لكن اليوم إن كنا نحتسب أيضا تأثير علاوة المخاطر المتعلقة بالتعريفات الجمركية وأيضا اتجاه السياسة الأمريكية اليوم بشكل متزايد لزيادة حصتها في الشركات وتحديدا يعني شركات التكنولوجيا، كما ننظر في شركة انتل واليوم الحديث في شركات الدفاع. هذا الأمر إلى أي مدى يدفعنا اليوم للتساؤل إلى هذه الشركات كيف ستتأثر فعليا بدلا من المنح التي كانت تحصل منها من الحكومة وتأثيرها اليوم بحصص تمتلكها الحكومة فعلا؟
Frankly, to me, it's a concerning matter for the long term. However, in the short term, I don't think the markets are going to take a negative view of that because at some level, the government has control directly or indirectly. They may not have stakes. And it is quite common, in the developed world, if you look at Europe, a lot of the major companies have some kind of a ownership from the local government. And it's the same case in other major countries like India, China, and many other places where, and for example, in Brazil, where they own a lot of energy stock, So it is not uncommon. What is disturbing is that it is not a good pattern for a free market economy like the US. However, it is not very different than giving grants but getting no equity. And the same thing for the defense sector. The government does control a lot of what products can be sold and who they can be sold to, and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit disturbing, and long term it is very disturbing because you don't know what the next administration or the following administration is going to do, how far they're going to do. And you also the government is not a good operator of businesses, never has been, never will be. So in longer term, it's a little bit of a concern. In the short term, I don't think it's that significant of a deal.
سنديب، يعني تتحدث عن المدى القصير والمدى الطويل. لفتني أنا ما قاله اليوم التشيرمان لأوك تري كابيتال هوارد ماركس في مقابلة وحتى في الميموز لديه، تحدث بأن اليوم يعتقد أن السوق الأسهم الأمريكية في مراحل الأولى من الفقاعة. لا يقول بأنه سنشهد تصحيح ربما في وقت قريب، ولكن في المراحل الأولى للفقاعة. برأيك سنديب، متى يجب أن نتخوف من هذه التقييمات، وما بالنسبة للمستثمر أن يقوم به في وضع كهذا؟
Well, we've been in a bubble. Let's be honest. In the S&P was quite overvalued at 4,800. It's very overvalued right now. But the issue at hand is that the money is not leaving the market. And as regards the valuations of the market, we can all agree that the S&P in particular is driven by 10, 15 stocks, and what they do is what is driving the overall valuation of the market. So we need to separate the conversation between market overvaluation and individual equity or sector evaluation. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, areas that have not done well, healthcare, energy, probably REITs, that would benefit, and small cap and mid caps, that would benefit from lower interest rates. So the dynamic is not to be focused on a very broad stroke comment like market overvaluation. It's probably a good idea to own a little bit less of the high weighted equities, 10, 15, 20 of those in the S&P 500, and look away down the market cap, look away and peel the onion layer and look through sectors and find opportunities. So another way I would put it is that the market has done okay this year. We had a major stumble in April, and we're back to the all-time highs, but the market's only up around 10%. And there's a vast amount of sectors and individual equities and other indices that are not driven by top-heavy weighting. They're up, probably in the 20% range or more. So that is a very good dynamic, and that supports the idea that the money is not yet leaving the system. And when it does, that would be a cause for concern. But I think we are still in a rotational phase, and there is a lot of opportunity if you look away from the top-heavy indices like the S&P.
سنديب شرما، رئيس الاستثمار في سنتكس كابيتال، شكرا جزيلا لك.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.